So I want to talk about 18th century Dublin. Not the 18th century we normally think about, a much dirtier one. We tend to glorify achievements in the past, which is fine, but you wouldn't want to live there. For an archaeologist, I'm a bit of a pastist. So not only am I not a fan of this violence I'm going to talk about, I'm fascinated by it because I can't stand it. I'm terrified of violence. But I'm interested in how the energy of a city comes from this tension between placidity and chaos. And we think of cities now as dangerous places, but really they're much less dangerous than they were 250 years ago. So in case you are pining for a simpler time, here's a slice of life. And I'll warn you, this is about all I know about the 18th century. I'm going to make some flippant remarks, some gross generalizations, and tell you the story of the Liberty Boys and the Ormonde Boys. They came out of the ashes of an earlier gang called the Kevin Bale, who peaked in the 1720s and specialized in rescuing prisoners from the police. They were rounded up in the 1730s and transported, but out of them grew the original Northsiders versus Southsiders. The Liberty Boys were based around Francis Street and were weavers' apprentices, and the Ormonde Boys, who were based around the Ormonde markets and were slaughterhouse carriers and butchers' apprentices. Dublin at the time was a pretty fighty place. It was messy, rowdy, noisy, smelly. You'd probably get robbed. But there were lots of gangs. There was the New Street Party, who sound like an indie band, the Dolphins Barn Boys, the Marybone Lane Boys, and in fact, Trinity students were actually known for their engagements of a sanguinary nature. And it's not just spare time and access to meat hooks that made people go around taking each other's bowels out. It used to be that if you were an apprentice, you'd work hard, you'd become a journeyman, maybe a master craftsman, maybe live to see 40, maybe keep a tooth. But between 1600 and 1760, Dublin's population grew from 10,000 to 140,000. So you've got a lot more apprentices and a lot less incentive to act according to the strict standards expected of an apprentice. So fighting was common, policing was not. Constables were voluntary, they were generally very elderly, they had a rattle, they were referred to as tattered somnambulists. They were no match for the fighters. And the fighters didn't necessarily dislike each other. They didn't hate each other. And it's not really clear why they were fighting, but there were strict codes. You couldn't just turn up, you couldn't just become a member, and you couldn't just turn up and pick a fight. They fought everywhere and using all available objects, and it wasn't uncommon for, as one 1769 report put it, a man to be cut with hangers, and one man had his belly ripped open so his bowels came out, and he died later that night in dreadful agony. A favorite punishment was called hawking, otherwise known as hamstringing, which is cutting the tendons at the backs of the knees. So all of a sudden, those Temple Bar punch-ups look a bit pussy now, I think. Not like one fight over the control of the Liffey bridges. Sometimes they had ostensible reasons, which lasted a whole day on a Saturday. Then they took Sunday off. They went home for their tea. They had a snooze. They went to Mass. They came back on Monday morning. How you doing? Kicks off again, and they finish it off. I'm not sure who won. But my favorite story involves a guy who went by the name of Gallows Paul. I don't think that he called himself that. And he was one of the people who helped to disband the Kevin Bale. And they were still pretty sore about this. And in 1734, so it's pretty soon after, the Liberty Boys caught him. But instead of hogging the glory, they summoned the Ormonde Boys in their 18th century version of texting. And together, in the spirit of gamesmanship and a rare moment of peace and cross-river reconciliation, they hung him in Weaver Square, which you see here in the Liberties. And it wasn't just ruffian apprentices. The well-heeled were also prone to the odd throwdown, especially Trinity students, who generally aligned themselves with the Liberty Boys, and they would fight with their room keys. They would hide them up their sleeves. There were slightly different rules for Trinity students now. One time, a bunch of Ormonde boys caught some and hung them from meat hooks. And when the authorities came, they discovered that by pitying their youth and in respect of their rank, they'd just been hung by the waistbands of their breeches because college boys can empty their own bowels. This particular type of recreational blood sporting died out by the 1790s, probably for reasons as complex as it started. People were transported, a bunch of them politicized, industrial processes brought more work. They also took up a more egalitarian form of faction fighting. Maybe we'll do that another time. Much later, you have the rise of organized league sports. And it'd be a very nice, neat ending to say that someone just threw a ball into the fray, but it would be lying. The next time you're walking through Temple Bar or its equivalent in any other city, you find yourself in the middle of one of Dublin's ineffectual riots, just remember, the more things change, the more they stay the same, but in terms of city life, we've never had it so good. Thank you.